I am a daring highwayman, likewise a gallant rover. From London town I surely came since I became a rover. For a maid who proved with child, for England I sailed over. I left my parents almost wild since I became a rover.
So I wonder if we should go on and talk about the particular songs that I chose. So they being the Daring Highwayman, The Birds of Harmony, Cruel Mother, and The Troubles of This World, or There's Nothing Cheap But Poor Men's Labour. Snappy title there.
Yes, that's right, which is still very true. Yes. Well, I think the choice that you've made from an artistic point of view, well, and also, I suppose, with a historian's eye, you've probably chosen them because they're interesting from all sorts of angles.
Yes, they're interesting.
And, I mean, you haven't chosen any murder ballads. Well, actually, you have. Cruel Mother is a murder ballad.
Yes,
I mean, and one of the worst kinds of infanticide.
It is horrendous.
It's pretty horrendous.
Ballad, yeah. But yes, not the...
Of the ones that you've chosen, The Cruel Mother is probably the oldest of the four that we're going to talk about, in that it does certainly it existed in the 1670s and probably in the 1630s and maybe even earlier than that. And that's an example of something that may have come from a traditional ballad, a traditional oral folk ballad.
Why do you say that?
Well, because of the starkness of the theme and the way it's presented. And not many people in later periods would choose to write about murdering babies like that. So I think the whole feel of it, but this is supposition. If we don't have any evidence, we can't say it goes back further than that. But it is quite stark. So the Troubles of This World. What was the subtitle?
Or There's Nothing Cheap But Poor Men's Labour.
Right, okay, yes. Again, that comes from late 17th century, 1670s, 1680s, sometime around then. And it is a protest song. It is saying how, how hard the poor are finding life. And it's really got sort of two themes, really. One is that because trade is bad, and that's quite common in protest songs of the time, that really the blame is on, the times. But the other theme in that particular song is that the rich people are not treating the poor.
Well, it's about wages as well, isn't it? Exactly. I see the times they make me weep. There's none but poor men's labour cheap. Yeah. So it's, about how difficult it is to make ends meet.
Definitely written, from the poor's point of view. But it's not revolutionary. It's not saying we've got to change the system. We've got to get rid of the royalty and nobility and stuff. We don't, it's not a republic.
We're not storming the palace.
No, exactly. No storming.
We're getting annoyed.
No storming anywhere.
No.
What it's saying is that them rich people should treat us better.
Yeah.
And that's true, really, of most sort of protesty type songs in the broadside genre. Okay, there are more revolutionary things, but most of the time they are sort of a conservative, in inverted commas, protest, in that things aren't right within the system, but we're not saying change the system. We're just saying give us cheaper bread and decent wages, kind of thing. Yeah. So another one you've chosen is the Birds' Harmony.
The Woody choristers.
Woody choristers. Broadside ballads often, especially the early ones, often have a subtitle, which is often more interesting than the...
And often quite long.
Yeah, exactly.
There's no snappy titles.
They tell the whole story in the title.
Yeah.
But that's typical of the time in a way, in that it's putting human words and human emotions into the natural world, especially birds. Birds are very popular with poets and songwriters. And that one, in effect, just goes through different types of birds. And each verse is the bird itself and explaining why it has a red breast or why it sings like it does or something. I mean, it's not deep poetical stuff, but it's the kind of thing that is sort of sells. I suppose it sold well because it was sort of cute.
I mean, to me, it's actually quite magical as well, because it's kind of, you know, you get creatures talking in all sorts of, you know the Bible, you know.
So and fables and so on. But it's a fairly standard poetical way of getting across things, is to put things in the mouths of animals or birds.
I mean, the reason I chose that was because I've only ever heard a fragment of that. I can't quite remember who it was recorded. I think it might have been Peter Kennedy, but I could be wrong about that. It's an Irish singer singing, and it's called The Hawk and the Crow. It's just a couple of verses. And so coming across the whole thing in the library was a real revelation, and there are quite a lot of copies, so it's obviously popular at that point, and sort of, you know, often there are several variants of a folk song that you find. That was the only sort of oral example I found of that, so I thought it might be interesting to just explore.
Well, it means that you've got a tune for it, at least.
Sorry?
It means that you've got a tune for it.
Well, actually, it says on the ballad.
It does, right?
To the tune of, I think, The Spinning Wheel.
Right, OK, that was a fairly
so then
standard tune.
I looked around and found that, So
the Broadside, the song itself, as far as we know, dates from the 1680s or thereabouts. That's the earliest broadside that we know of. But it was reprinted, certainly, throughout the 18th century. So in the 1770s and 80s, 100 years later, they were still printing it. So clearly it's, you know, that's one measure of how popular a song is, if the printers think it's still going to sell. And of course that means it's more likely to have lasted in the oral tradition if it's been around for 100 years in print, rather than just being a pop song that comes and goes. So I wouldn't be surprised if in the 18th century it was regularly sung, but by the 19th century, or late 19th century, when the folk song collectors come along, then it would have, in effect, faded from view. Because this idea that our folk songs go back thousands of years is complete nonsense. Most of the folk songs that we know nowadays only date from the 19th century. Only about 25% of them come from the 18th century. Because that's what pop songs do. Now, in the folk world, things come and go much slower than the pop world, but they still did come and go. So a song would be popular for, 50 years or something, and then it would fade away, because we've got new songs coming along all the time.
How many battles I've been in through France and Spain and Flanders, and always fought with courage bold under my brave commanders. But through the usage I received, no one shall ever control me. Resolve it for my liberty, strong walls never will hold me.
Now, you have chosen one 19th century song, the Newry Highwayman.
Daring Highwayman.
The Daring Highwayman. It often says he comes from Newry in Ireland. And that's a good example of a highwayman ballad. I mean, crime ballads were popular. There's lots of songs about Dick Turpin and, and other known highway persons. And in fact, there was quite a public backlash against them, saying, "Oh no, all our young people are learning these songs that glorify crime and make them want to buy a horse and go out there and rob people." There was a sort of moral panic about them at the time, and a lot of them have survived.
I thought that was really interesting because there are quite a lot of songs, Wild and Undaunted as well.
Yes, Wild and Undaunted Youth.
Yes, about, I'm a highwayman and I've done this and now I'm going to hang. Basically, that's kind of a small appraisal of the songs. But I just thought it was really interesting because I think the character of the Highwayman has endured quite a few centuries, you know, even into modern popular culture. I mean, when I was little, we had, you know, Adam and the Ants. I am a dandy highwayman. You had Dick Turpin, you know, sort of as serialised on TV, and just I thought, you know. Kind of the opposite to the Woody choristers, which is, you know, there's not many examples of. I wanted to choose something that there was loads of examples of. Yeah. And it also was interesting how, like, novels played into the idea, and how you know, from the fact of the Highwaymen, which, you know, they generally were not very nice people at all. It's
like pirates.
Yeah,
you know, pirates were not nice people.
Really horrible. But that's not what the song's about. The song, I think, essentially, it's got fed into it this sort of Robin Hood narrative. Yeah, there's often I rob the rich, but I give to the poor, and I think that's one thing. And I also think it's that the anti-hero, the birth of that sort of, you know, whole idea of, you know, it's a lovable scumbag.
Well, that's what the moral panic was about, that, you know, that this was being perpetuated in the popular culture. And you're right about the novelistic notion, the notion of the highwayman as the gentleman of the road, as they were called, right? You know, as you know, somebody who robs people but does it nicely, you know, and so on, which is complete opposite to how they really were. Yes. That whole view of highwaymen comes from the novels of the time. A novel called Rookwood by
Claude Duval.
Claude
Duval is the highwayman,
yes, exactly.
in that, isn't he?
It was the novels of the time that set the tone for the songs, not the other way around. Songs before that time were about highwaymen, but they were, in a way, more realistic in that, you know, that they weren't nice people. But from that point onwards, they become heroes. The Robin Hood thing comes in of, you know, robbing the rich. And so the Broadside Ballads are following another part of the popular culture. They're feeding the novels into the song world.
They're like 18th century gangster rap, I think.
Yes.
And, you know, but also, you know, Peaky Blinders, it's looking at, you know, it's drawing something out of people that do terrible things.
All
gangster
of the songs
films.
On the Broadside, certainly, all of the songs do end up with the highwayman being caught and executed.
So, but that provides a sort of a moral, you know, okayness to then liking the.
Well, exactly.
You know, he gets his just desserts at the end, but
I was
it's really
daring,
compelling.
I was dashing,
and I robbed this,
but they caught me in the end.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to hang.
Yeah. That kind of makes it okay. To like the song.
Yeah, exactly.
And
well, it covers them against the moralists who say that you know, this is a bad thing. Yeah.
Back to England shores I came as fast as wind could blow me. Resolving for my liberty, no one should ever control me. Back to England shores I came and found my name deserted. My parents' heart was almost broken, I was sore affrighted. And poverty come on me. For want of money and a friend, it brought destruction on me. The very first